What is your worst experience with bad neighbors? We had some neighbors that used to leave their garbage out in plastic bags the night before garbage day instead of putting it in a bin. Around here, that's just ringing the dinner bell for raccoons and other critters. Sure enough, come morning, there's garbage strewn all over the neighborhood. What the raccoons and skunks didn't spread around, the wind picked up. Some of the people on the street kindly approached the guy and asked him to put his garbage in a bin. He told them to go screw themselves. Thus began the garbage wars. Every morning of garbage day, some people on my street would collect all the half-eaten and rotten trash from their lawns and toss it back onto the dude's backyard. He would collect it and then dump it back on their lawns, or cram it in their bushes. People started finding half-eaten burritos and candy wrappers in their mailboxes. The streets started to look like a slum. Police were called, health inspectors, city bylaw enforcement. Each side was calling in whatever authority they could muster to get their enemy in crap. The dude and his family, amazingly, his wife seemed perfectly pleasant, lasted about 8 months and then moved. Every once in a while I find a random margarine lid or a piece of styrofoam in my hedge, and my mind goes back to those dark days of war. I am astonished that the wife seemed perfectly pleasant. Someone with that lack of consideration for other people in his neighborhood? I don't know, I would just imagine they don't make a great partner. Story 2. They were crackheads. They had 2 kids, were physically and verbally abusive to each other, and were hoarders on top of it. Tried calling CPS and the police over and over, but was never taken seriously. They ended up burning down their apartment and caused thousands of dollars in damages to the rest of the apartment building because they were cooking drugs. We had to move out, as did many others. The silver lining is that they finally got their kids taken away after that. Well, as far as bad neighbors go, ones that burn down their apartment are pretty bad. Story 3. The matriarch of my crazy neighbors nailed all of the windows shut in their house, then removed the doorknobs and installed several deadbolts. This was to keep her grandkids home while she was at work and everyone else out. Child welfare stopped by and were okay with this. The kids were able to get one window open without her knowing, and they would usually leave during the day and make it back before she got off work. Eventually, there were maybe a dozen young adults living there too, and they all used the window as the main entrance. It unfortunately bordered my driveway and was mere feet from my house. At all hours of the day, people would be out there, wiggling in and out the window. People got tired of being cooped up and major fights broke out. I regularly heard bodies hitting walls or furniture or fists, as well as yells of, "Well, stop threatening and get your goddamn gun already." I have PTSD, and it was just day after day of trying to keep myself calm. The kids had a pneumatic BB gun, a look-alike handgun, and one morning shot up my neighbor's car. She left to work at a hospital early in the morning, before first light, and didn't notice. When she shut her car door, all the glass fell out of the windows. Later in the morning, he shot out a window in the school across the street, and a bit after that, he shot my husband in the shoulder. He kept shooting even when the police arrived. The police called the matriarch, who unlocked all the deadbolts and took away the kids' guns, and dragged them outside so they could be cuffed and taken away. The youngest was maybe 9. Since no one confessed or ratted and the police weren't sure which of the 3 did it, they were released and not charged. Thankfully, this act of physical violence against my husband got them evicted. After tearing up the house, breaking all the windows and ripping out the electrical boxes and punching random holes in the walls, the kids went to the landlord's house with their look-alike handguns and shot up the windows in her house. Again arrested, but being juveniles, no repercussions. A couple of weeks later, her vehicle and garage were firebombed, but no one was charged with that. I am so glad they're gone. I live in a wonderful neighborhood, not rich by any means, but the most awesome people. But it's hard to enjoy the community with that going on next door. I hope they somehow find some peace in life. Story 4. Just straight-up rednecks who wanted the full neighbor experience without putting in any effort themselves. It was like they'd moved from some hillbilly commune where you could just demand things of your neighbors. Every day when I got home from school, the 3 youngest kids would bang on our door until we gave them snacks. One of them, when denied snacks, came back and broke our glass door with a hammer. They turned the shared side yard, legally ours but shared because we weren't necessarily using it, into a lumber yard/playground where they dug a massive pit for mud wrestling. No BS there. Mud wrestling. The second oldest kid, 6 in total, had an old AC air handling unit in the backyard that he was allowed to hit with a sledgehammer when he got angry. He got angry often, and usually at irregular hours. I ran into him at a bowling alley years after they had moved away/got kicked out/went bankrupt. He had a tattoo across his chest that said "Immortal Death" in a black-red-black gradient. He also had giant scars all over his back, chest, and arms. He said he woke up in the middle of the highway on Halloween night all cut up. Who knows if that's true. But if it could happen to anyone, he was the guy. A few more redneck activities because this comment is getting some attention. Lighting bottle rockets out of the tailpipe of their dad's truck. The youngest kid got stuck in the mud pit up to his head and they couldn't get him out for hours. On rainy nights, they used to put up these rusty cots in the front yard and sleep in the rain. That one didn't even register as redneck. Felt more like an Addams Family thing to do. They somehow got their hands on what looked like municipal park playground equipment, one of which was a steel slide about 2 stories tall. One of the younger kids took a bike up to the top of it and tried to ride down, but fell over backwards and smacked his head on the metal steps a few times. The mom watched him do it, and I specifically remember her saying, "He's gotta learn somehow," after he fell. Story 5. I lived in an apartment with a lot of rotating tenants. An elderly lady moved in across the hall from me and promptly started hoarding. I started to figure it out when her deck/porch started to fill up with odds and ends furniture, including but not limited to a roll-top desk. She also yelled at me once for taking her key out of the front door and putting it in the mail slot. Anyway, after a couple of weeks, I started to realize I hadn't seen her in a while and started to smell something weird. Turns out she had died, and no one knew about it for a week, hence the smell. Her family came and cleared out all of her stuff about a week after that. This is Wisconsin in the winter, and I had my good Doc Marten work boots outside my door because they were wet. They used one of my boots to prop open their door while they moved out and then stole them when they were done. So, I guess being inconsiderate just runs in the family, although I don't know if stealing is inconsiderate. I feel like it's in a league of its own. Anyway, yeah, pretty solidly bad neighbor. Story 6. A bunch of things with my ding-dong neighbor. She had a large dog that hated my older, smaller dog. One day, her dog ran into my yard and bit my dog. She did apologize for this one, and it didn't happen again. Neighbor dumped her lawn clippings into my backyard, had to ask her to stop and clean up her mess. She decided to build a fence, no survey, so I paid for a survey of my property. She started building her fence 3 feet over onto my property. I had her stop and remove the fence. She was angry and never rebuilt it. I painted my house, she painted her house the same color. I bought a car, she bought a new car, same color, same configuration. There's other minor stuff, but that's enough. Odd person, very odd. Story 7. He lived in the apartment right below my husband and I. It went from constant complaints, to him calling the cops on us multiple times, to him leaving threatening messages on our car and front door. When we first moved in, he was upset with the landlord for renting above him, left plenty of unpleasant notes, and was interrupted quite a few times when we were talking to the landlord. When we moved in, we only had a mattress and no other furniture. But he kept calling our landlord saying that we were moving furniture around at 2 a.m. and had our TV on at full blast. After the 8th complaint in 2 months of us still moving around furniture and TV being too loud, we finally showed our apartment to the landlord. We literally didn't have a TV and still only had our mattress. Then the neighbor started leaving notes on our car telling us to keep it down, and he even put in writing, "There needs to be no noise after 10 p.m. or else I'll call the cops." We usually didn't even get home until around 11 p.m., and we were respectful to make sure we kept everything down, because we knew that not everyone had our work schedule. So we tried keeping it down even more, and there were so many instances when we'd be eating our dinner or cuddling quietly or even sleeping, and he'd be banging on his ceiling/our floor. After a few months, he started calling the cops. And it got to the point where even the cops told him to stop calling about a noise complaint, because it's a landlord issue. And every time they came, they never even heard anything. The last time they showed up, I was asleep, and my husband ended up talking to them and explaining everything. They suggested we file a harassment complaint. Then the cops showed up at the coffee shop I worked at the time and explained that they were getting almost nightly calls. And they suggested to me too that we should file a harassment complaint against the neighbor. Then he started leaving threatening notes on our car and front door, and we kept hearing our doorknob jiggle. He claimed that he and a friend had sat outside our apartment for 2 hours and listened to all the noise we were making. He's a retired cop and will call in a few favors if we continue making noise. He knows where we park our car, so we better start parking it somewhere else if we didn't want it to get damaged, etc. We kept the notes and made copies for the landlord and let him know that this was what we were dealing with. So we're just keeping him in the loop before stuff starts getting real. AKA, we're tired of this. And if an old guy gets his crap rocked, then just know it's been a long time coming. The last complaint was when he ran outside to the landlord screaming that something needed to be done about us because he heard our bed squeak the night before, and how dare he rent to some crazy college kids who are partying and banging all night. The landlord finally told him to screw off and stop being a bitter old man. Then the neighbor took a total 180. We found out that he had decided to sue the landlord and was moving. Suddenly, the neighbor kept offering us rides when one of us was walking. He stopped complaining and leaving notes. But our doorknob kept jiggling and turning at around midnight, and whenever we would check our door, we would hear someone running down the hall as we would approach it. He eventually moved away, and, shockingly, we haven't gotten a complaint from any other neighbor in the last 3 years we've lived here. Okay, I'm straight up like, is the guy hallucinating? Because man seemed so sure. Most people don't just harass people just for the fun of it, right? They do perceive that they have been wronged in some way. And if it's sound, and the sound wasn't actually there, he might just straight up be hallucinating. Hearing a TV when they don't even own a TV is wild. I hope that guy is alright. But I also know that that guy is a terrible neighbor. Story 8. We rented a house that had another apartment in the basement. The lady who lived below us kept to herself for the most part, so we didn't see her much. Part of our rental was a detached garage, and she asked if she could put a small deep freezer in our garage. We were using it for storage, so we were fine with it. After a couple of weeks of having her freezer in there, it somehow got unplugged, and she came unglued on us and wanted us to pay to replace everything. I understood her frustration, but we hardly ever went into the garage since it was only for storage. In other words, we definitely did not unplug it, and our landlord agreed. But she was pissed. She had a son in college who came home for the summer. During that summer, he found a cat and brought it home. His mom said no cats inside, so he would feed the kitten outside. She was pretty wild. He left for school again in the fall, and we noticed that the cat was getting very thin. We started feeding her outside in her usual spot. Around Christmas, we bought a bag of cat food and I made a plate of cookies and left them both at our neighbor's front door. The next day, they were both back on our porch. Rude, but whatever. We continued to feed the cat because she obviously wasn't feeding her. A few weeks later, the cat came to our door crying. She was trying to come inside. Super weird considering she was pretty wild and we had never let her inside before. I let her in and noticed that she was pregnant and for sure was about to have babies. I made her a little corner and she had babies the next day. We let her stay in the house with us, but we knew we couldn't keep her. I went downstairs to talk to our neighbor. She said that her son's cat was a boy, so the cat we had obviously wasn't his. I posted on Facebook to see if anyone was interested in fostering a cat and her kittens because we couldn't keep her. Her son saw my post on Facebook and got super mad at his mom. She then called the cops and said that I stole her cat and lied to her when she confronted me about having the cat in my possession. It was the stupidest, most frustrating thing that had ever happened to me as far as neighbors go. Story 9. Lived in a small apartment and my neighbors always cranked up their music to 11, like loud. And until something like 7 a.m. Maybe later, but that's when I would leave for work. It was so loud that I couldn't hear my own TV over it. My neighbors and I would bang on the door, but they would never open it. It was like trying to sleep at a festival. Then at some point I found out that they often left for a bar across the street, but would just leave the music on. So I would pull the breaker for their apartment, but they would just come back at 5 a.m. and turn it back on. It was reported by heaps of people, but nothing was ever done. So at some point I would jam their lock when they went out, so their keys wouldn't work anymore. And they had to go get the property manager in while the music was blasting inside. After a couple times of that happening, they were evicted. Maybe I'm the bad neighbor in this story. Story 10. My neighbor's son used to go out partying all week, then bring his friends back and then party at his place till like 5 to 6 a.m. The issue? He would party upstairs in his bedroom, music blaring, yelling. If it was just the constant noise, I could sleep through it, but not that. I was running on no sleep and had to be up at 8 for work. I was getting in trouble at work for being too exhausted, and no one believed it was because my neighbor wasn't letting me sleep. It was hell. So after trying to talk to the jerk, we posted a note through the door. His mom worked nights. She got home and all hell broke loose. The note was reasonable. We asked them to move the after party downstairs because we couldn't sleep through all the noise. We didn't intend for his mom to get the note. Wow, she was so mad. When my alarm went off an hour or so later, he was angrily yelling that it wasn't fair that my alarm woke him up every day. Ah, yes, an alarm going off once or twice before work was totally unreasonable, and his music blasting all night was. The party stopped though. Story 11. The block of flats I used to live in was being converted into Airbnb rooms by the landlord. We, me and my wife, were the last residential tenants renting there out of the 14 flats. It was unstaffed, so 99% of the time the rooms were booked by in-call escorts and drug dealers. For a solid week, we had dealers in and out of the door up and down the adjoining stairwell every 30 minutes. One night, we saw a black SUV pull up near the front of the property and try to bundle one of the women who was staying in the dealer room opposite ours. She managed to get away. We called the police as we were scared for her safety. They ended up getting a warrant, as we told them of our suspicions. And when tallied up with the attempted bundling, the duty sergeant was happy to bust their door in, searched the lot of them, and made arrests. The other adjoining room/flat had a couple staying in it, got a bit drunk as you do, and we heard them arguing, and it's getting heated. At some point, some sort of physical violence occurred. Police came back again, told the guy to leave and not to return. But he did come back and shouted at her, threatening to stab her. A short while later, we heard the most terrifying, blood-curdling scream and called police again. He went round the back of the property, got in a car, and sped off moments before the police turned up. The final tale was on my day off. I was literally hearing a knock at the flat's bottom door either every half hour or hourly. Saw Johns with their cash waiting to come up and get their end away with an escort who stayed for a few nights in the adjoining flat, the drug grade one. John would then leave, and not even 5 minutes later, she was on to the next, and I heard everything. Walls were horrifically thin. I hated that place, but it was that or homelessness. We've now lived in our forever home, a nice little bungalow in the countryside for the last year, and the peace and quiet has been a godsend. Story 12. When my wife and I moved into our house in the summer of 2019, the neighbors on either side of us warned us about the people renting the house directly behind ours. Apparently, they'd been known to cause trouble and blow things way out of proportion, bordering on paranoia of everyone around them. We kept this in mind, but had no issues for the first 6 months or so after moving in. Their house sits on a hill behind ours and so overlooks the majority of our backyard due to the elevation change. Well, one night, or morning technically, at about 3 a.m., we wake up to ring notifications from our phones, showing video from our front doorbell. There's a man standing barefoot in a sleeveless shirt on our porch, pounding our front door. We give it 2 to 3 minutes just watching him on the app, thinking maybe he's drunk, or maybe he has the wrong house, essentially giving him the benefit of the doubt. But then we start to hear him say, "Come out, you freaking coward, I'm gonna screw you up." And he leaves the porch and starts to head around the side of our house towards our backyard. Considering we had no idea who this was, my wife now immediately calls the police. As I move out of our bedroom towards the external doors to look/listen for any attempt of home invasion. At this point, our neighbors directly behind us throw a huge spotlight into our backyard from theirs. We're thinking, okay, cool. They know something is up and they're trying to help us out by shedding light on our backyard. The cops arrive several long minutes later and knock. We explain the situation and they head out back to look around and get the scoop from the neighbors with the spotlight. It turns out that the spotlight neighbor was the one on our porch. He had jumped our fence into our backyard and up into his yard and then threw the light on. He told the police that several nights prior I had let my puppy out in my own backyard in the middle of the night, and because I was in my boxers, I was trying to expose myself to his family, all because they could look down on our entire yard from where theirs sits. He then followed this up to the police with evidence, which consisted of videos he had taken through our windows of my wife and I inside our home doing normal things, chores, watching TV, etc. Nothing inappropriate or even scandalous. Not that it would have mattered anyway, we were in our own home. Because of the elevation difference, if they went out of their way, they could technically slightly see through our closed blinds due to the angle. So they'd been filming us for no reason at all and expected the police to see this as reasonable. The cops came back in and my wife was devastated. A huge breach of our privacy, of course, and totally unfounded accusations, as we had never done anything to anger these people and we hadn't even met them. The police told us, "Just don't worry about it. If you try something again, just give us a call," which wasn't the most comforting at the time. They moved out a few months later without any additional issues. My wife and I celebrated it like it was a holiday when we saw the moving van in the driveway. I was confused about the spotlight, and to be honest, I still kind of am. Why would they do that if they wanted to... Actually, thinking about it, no, I have no idea what they wanted to do with that. That is certainly a weird and just horrible neighbor. The peeking through closed blinds thing is disgusting, OP. I'm so sorry for you and your wife's privacy. That is unforgivable. Anyway, I hope you are thoroughly infuriated with these horrible neighbor stories. I know I am. But that's all the time we have for today, so worry no longer. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you in the next one.